Lawyers. What's the most shocking thing someone has confessed during a divorce that made you question taking the case? I've been practicing family law for 15 years, and I thought I'd heard everything. Cheating spouses, hidden assets, custody battles that turned nuclear. Nothing surprised me anymore. Then Valentina Reeves walked into my office on a rainy Thursday afternoon, and everything I thought I knew about human nature got thrown out the window. She looked like money. Designer handbag, perfectly styled auburn hair, the kind of understated jewelry that costs more than most people's cars. Her husband Damien owned a chain of high-end restaurants across the state. On paper, this looked like a straightforward, wealthy divorce. She wanted half of everything. He was probably hiding assets. Standard playbook. "I need to divorce my husband," she said, her voice steady but her hands trembling as she signed the retainer agreement. "What are the grounds?" I asked, pulling up a fresh file on my computer. "Irreconcilable differences," she replied quickly. Too quickly. I'd learned to read between the lines. In 15 years, you develop instincts about when clients aren't telling you everything. Valentina was holding something back, something big. "Mrs. Reeves, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anything about your marriage, your husband, or your situation that could complicate this divorce? Any abuse, affairs, criminal activity?" She stared at her hands for a long moment. When she looked up, her composure cracked. "There's something I need to tell you, but if I do, you might not want to represent me." My stomach tightened. In my experience, when clients say that, they're usually right. "I can't properly represent you unless I know everything," I said gently. She took a shaky breath. "6 months ago, I discovered something about Damien, something that made me realize the man I married doesn't exist." I waited. Sometimes silence gets you more information than questions. I thought he was working late at the restaurant. He'd been staying out until 2 or 3 a.m., claiming he was doing inventory or meeting with suppliers. I started to suspect an affair, so I hired a private investigator. She pulled a manila envelope from her purse with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "What did you find?" I asked. "He wasn't having an affair." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "He was running a different kind of business entirely, out of the restaurant's basement." The envelope contained photographs. As I flipped through them, my blood turned cold. The images showed the basement of what I assumed was one of Damien's restaurants, but it had been converted into something else entirely, something that made my 15 years of legal experience feel inadequate. "Mrs. Reeves," I said carefully, "you need to take this to the police immediately." "I can't." Tears started flowing down her cheeks. "You don't understand. I'm not just his wife. I'm not just a victim who discovered this." My hands froze on the photographs. "What do you mean?" She looked directly at me, and what I saw in her eyes made every instinct scream that I should stop this conversation right now. "I mean, I've been helping him for 3 years. I've been keeping the books, managing the clientele. I thought we were just laundering money through the restaurants." The room felt like it was spinning. "But it's so much worse than that. And now I want out. But Damien says if I try to leave, he'll make sure I go down with him. He has evidence that makes me look like the mastermind." I set the photographs down with shaking hands. "Mrs. Reeves, I think you need a criminal defense attorney, not a divorce lawyer." "Please," she whispered, "just hear me out. Because there's something else, something that changes everything." I should have ended the consultation right there. I should have referred her to criminal counsel and walked away. But something in her voice, the desperation, the fear, made me stay. "I'm listening." She reached into her purse again and pulled out a thumb drive. 3 weeks ago, I was going through Damien's computer, trying to copy financial records for the divorce. That's when I found this. She slid the drive across my desk. "What's on it?" "Videos, recordings, evidence of everything Damien's been doing, but also," she paused, struggling with the words, "evidence that he's been setting me up from the beginning, making it look like I was the one in charge." My mouth went dry. "What kind of videos?" "Security footage from the basement, conversations between Damien and his associates, financial records that show money flowing through accounts I never knew existed, but all in my name." She leaned forward, her voice urgent. "He's been planning this for years. If anything ever went wrong, I would take the fall. He has recordings of me counting money, signing documents, meeting with people I thought were restaurant suppliers, but who were actually—" She couldn't finish the sentence. I stared at the thumb drive like it might explode. "Mrs. Reeves, I have to ask, what exactly was your husband's operation?" She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. "Human trafficking," she finally whispered. "He was using the restaurants as a front. The basement of the downtown location it was where they kept people before moving them." The blood drained from my face. This wasn't just a divorce case. This was a federal crime. Multiple federal crimes. "And you were involved?" "I thought I was helping with money laundering," she said frantically. "He told me we were skimming restaurant profits to avoid taxes. I was handling what I thought were supplier payments and employee bonuses. I had no idea what was really happening until I saw those photos." She pointed to the envelope. "When I confronted him, he showed me security footage of myself handling cash, meeting with his contacts, signing paperwork. He said if I ever tried to leave or expose him, he'd turn everything over to the FBI and claim I was the one running the operation, while he was just a naive business owner being manipulated by his wife." I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. If what she was saying was true, she was either a victim of an elaborate setup or an accomplice trying to minimize her involvement before the authorities caught up with her. "Why come to me for a divorce? If you have evidence of his crimes, why not go straight to the police?" "Because I need immunity first," she said. I need to protect myself before I can protect anyone else. That's why I need the divorce, to separate myself legally from his assets and his crimes before I turn him in. She pulled out another document from her purse. I've already contacted the FBI. Agent Rosalind Cato is handling the case. She said if I can deliver Damien and provide evidence of the entire operation, they'll consider immunity in exchange for my cooperation. My heart was pounding. This was so far outside my expertise it wasn't even funny. Mrs. Reeves, you need a criminal defense attorney. This is way beyond— I have one, she interrupted. Theodore Bauer. He's the one who suggested I file for divorce first to protect any legitimate assets I might have. He said I needed a family law attorney who could handle the civil side while he manages the criminal case. I knew Ted Bauer. He was one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the state, and one of the most expensive. If Valentina could afford him, she had serious money behind her. What exactly do you want me to do? File for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences. Keep it simple and fast. Meanwhile, I'll be working with the FBI to build their case against Damien. When they arrest him, I want to already be legally separated from his assets, so I can't be implicated in the financial side of his operation. It sounded reasonable in theory, but something felt off. Mrs. Reeves, if your husband has been setting you up for years, don't you think he'll see a divorce filing as a red flag? Won't that tip him off that you're planning something? Her expression darkened. That's the problem. He already knows. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? I mean he found out about the private investigator, and he knows I've been copying files from his computer. Yesterday, he told me that if any divorce papers get filed, he'll immediately release all the evidence he has against me to the authorities. Then why are you here? She looked me straight in the eye. Because yesterday wasn't the first time he threatened me. 3 months ago, when I first started asking questions about the late nights, he grabbed me by the throat and told me what would happen if I ever tried to leave him. She pulled down the collar of her blouse, revealing faded bruise marks. That's when I decided I'd rather go to prison than spend another year married to him. But then I realized there might be a third option, which is, he dies. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Mrs. Reeves, I think you should leave my office right now. Wait, she said quickly. I'm not talking about murder. I'm talking about the fact that Damien has lung cancer. I blinked, completely thrown by this revelation. What? He was diagnosed 4 months ago, stage 4. The doctors gave him 6 to 8 months to live, but he's been refusing treatment. He says he won't spend his last months in chemotherapy. My mind was reeling, trying to process this new information. So you're planning to wait for him to die naturally? I'm planning to survive long enough for him to die naturally, she corrected. But I need legal protection in case he tries to destroy me before the cancer gets him. She leaned forward again. Here's what I think happened. Damien knew he was sick before he got the official diagnosis. That's why he started setting me up more aggressively over the past year. He's planning to confess everything to the authorities and pin it all on me, then die before he can be prosecuted. That way, his family keeps the legitimate restaurant business, and I go to prison for the rest of my life. The pieces were starting to fit together in a horrifying way. But if I'm already divorced from him and working with the FBI, his plan falls apart. The evidence he has against me becomes less credible if I'm the one who came forward first. Mrs. Reeves, this is incredibly dangerous. If your husband is as calculating as you say, filing for divorce could trigger him to accelerate his timeline. I know, she said quietly, but I'd rather take that risk than wait around for him to decide when to destroy my life. I stared at the thumb drive on my desk. What's your timeline with the FBI? Agent Cato wants to move within 2 weeks. They've been building a case against Damien's operation for 8 months, but they needed an inside source. I'm their best shot at getting the evidence they need for a conviction. And your husband doesn't know about your cooperation with the FBI? Not yet. But like I said, he knows I've been investigating him. It's only a matter of time before he figures out I've gone to the authorities. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the rain-soaked parking lot. In 15 years of practice, I'd never been asked to handle a case where my client was simultaneously a potential victim, a potential criminal, and a potential FBI informant. Mrs. Reeves, I need to ask you directly. How much of your husband's operation did you genuinely not know about? She was quiet for a long time. More than I should have, she finally admitted. Less than he thinks I did. What does that mean? It means I knew something wasn't right with the money. Restaurant profits don't fluctuate the way ours were fluctuating. I knew there were people coming and going from the downtown location at odd hours. I knew Damien was meeting with people who didn't look like food suppliers. She paused. But I convinced myself it was just money laundering. Or maybe drug money. I never imagined it was people. When did you first suspect it wasn't just financial crimes? 2 months ago. I was working late at the downtown restaurant doing inventory when I heard voices coming from the basement. I went down to investigate and found Damien talking to a man I'd never seen before. They were standing in front of a door I'd never noticed, one that was usually hidden behind stacked boxes. She shuddered. I could hear crying coming from behind that door. When I asked Damien about it later, he said it was a homeless person who'd broken in, and he was just giving them food before calling social services. But you didn't believe him? I wanted to. God, I wanted to believe him. But the crying sounded like a child. The room felt like it was closing in around me. That's when I hired the private investigator. And that's when I found out the truth. She gestured to the photographs. Those doors lead to rooms where they keep people before moving them. The crying I heard was a girl who couldn't have been more than 16. I felt sick. Mrs. Reeves, if you knew there were victims, Why didn't you go to police immediately? Because I was terrified, she said, starting to cry again. Because Damien had already shown me enough evidence to convince me that I'd go to prison too. Because I was a coward who cared more about protecting myself than protecting those people. She wiped her eyes. But I can't live with it anymore. That's why I contacted the FBI. That's why I'm willing to risk everything to bring him down. I walked back to my desk and sat down, my mind spinning. What exactly do you want me to file for divorce? I want to claim abuse and request immediate separation of assets. I want you to argue that I had no knowledge of my husband's business practices and that I need protection from potential financial liability related to his activities. That's going to be hard to argue if you've been keeping books for his operation. That's where this comes in, she said, tapping the thumb drive. It contains evidence that Damien forced me to participate. Recordings of him threatening me. Documentation showing how he manipulated me into signing things without understanding what they were. And the FBI has seen this evidence? Agent Cato has copies of everything. She's confident it will be enough to establish that I was coerced. I picked up the thumb drive, weighing it in my palm like it contained the secrets of the universe. Mrs. Reeves, I have to be honest with you. This case could destroy my practice. If it comes out that I knew about federal crimes and didn't report them immediately, I could lose my license. I understand, she said. But I also know you've built your career on helping women escape dangerous marriages. This is the most dangerous marriage you'll ever encounter. She was right about that. I'd represented women fleeing abusive husbands, women whose spouses had hidden assets, women whose partners had committed financial crimes, but nothing like this. I need time to think about this, I said. I don't have time, she replied urgently. Agent Cato wants to move on Damien next Friday. That gives us 1 week to file for divorce and establish my separation from his assets. Why the rush? Because they have intelligence that Damien is planning to move his operation. If they don't arrest him next week, the victims will be gone and the evidence will disappear. My hands were trembling as I set the thumb drive down. Mrs. Reeves, what happens if I say no? Then I file for divorce with a different attorney and you never see me again. But those people in Damien's basement don't get rescued next Friday. The weight of her words settled over me like a suffocating blanket. And if I say yes, then you help save lives, and you help send a monster to prison. I looked at the photographs again, focusing on the details I'd tried to avoid seeing the first time. The makeshift cells, the locks on the doors, the evidence of human suffering. How many people are we talking about? Agent Cato thinks at least 12 are currently being held at the downtown location, but based on the financial records, there have been dozens over the past 3 years. Dozens of lives, dozens of people who'd been bought and sold like property while I was handling routine divorces and custody disputes. Mrs. Reeves, I need you to answer one more question, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay, are you genuinely remorseful about your involvement? Or are you just trying to save yourself? She looked at me for a long moment, then reached into her purse one more time. She pulled out a small photograph and placed it on my desk. It showed a young girl, maybe 15 or 16, with dark hair and terrified eyes. Her name is Esperanza, Valentina said quietly. She's been in that basement for 2 months. Every night I go to sleep knowing she's there. Every morning I wake up knowing I could save her but haven't. She looked directly at me. I'm not a good person. I was complicit in something horrible, but I'm trying to do the right thing now, even if it destroys me. I stared at the photograph, then at the thumb drive, then at the woman sitting across from my desk who was asking me to risk everything to help her make amends for the unforgivable. If I take this case, you do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you. No more secrets, no more half-truths. If there's anything else you haven't told me, you tell me right now. She nodded. There's one more thing. Of course there was. What? Damien isn't working alone. He has partners in this. Important people. People with power. Who? I don't know all of them, but I know one of them is Judge Harrison Blackwood. My blood turned to ice. Judge Blackwood was one of the most respected judges in the state. He'd been on the bench for 20 years and was known for his harsh sentences for human trafficking cases. How do you know this? Because I've seen him at the restaurant after hours, and I've seen payments to his wife's consulting company in Damien's books. I put my head in my hands. This just kept getting worse. Mrs. Reeves, if Judge Blackwood is involved, this goes way deeper than your husband's operation. I know. That's why Agent Cato is so interested in my cooperation. They think this could be part of a larger network. I stood up and paced to the window again. Outside, the rain had stopped, but dark clouds still covered the sky. If I take this case, and Judge Blackwood finds out, he could destroy both of us. If you don't take this case, he'll keep destroying innocent people. She was right, and I knew it. I turned back to face her. I'll take the case, but we do this my way, and if anything goes wrong, you're on your own. Relief flooded her face. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. We might both end up in prison before this is over. I picked up the thumb drive and locked it in my office safe. I'm going to file for divorce tomorrow morning. Emergency petition citing abuse and requesting immediate asset protection. Are you prepared for your husband's reaction? I'm staying at a hotel under an assumed name. Agent Cato has a security detail watching me. Good, because once these papers are served, there's no going back. She stood up and gathered her things. Mrs. Reeves, I called as she reached the door. That girl in the photograph, Esperanza, do you really think we can save her? She turned back to me with tears in her eyes. I have to believe we can, because if we can't, I don't know how I'll live with myself. After she left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the rain-streaked window and wondering what I'd just gotten myself into. In 15 years of practice, I'd never taken a case that could end with either justice being served or everyone involved ending up dead. I called my secretary and told her to clear my schedule for the rest of the week. Then I opened my safe, took out the thumb drive, and began the most dangerous case of my career. The next morning, I arrived at the office at 6 a.m. to start drafting the divorce petition. I'd barely slept, my mind churning through all the ways this could go wrong. As I booted up my computer, my phone rang. "This is Agent Cato," the voice on the other end said without preamble. "We need to meet. Mrs. Reeves told me you might be calling. Can you be at the federal building in an hour?" I looked at my half-written petition. I'm in the middle of bring whatever you're working on. This can't wait. An hour later, I found myself in a sterile conference room with Agent Cato, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who looked like she hadn't smiled in years. "Valentina Reeves came to you yesterday," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Yes, she's asked me to file for divorce. And she told you about our investigation." "She did, though I have to say this is completely outside my area of expertise." Agent Cato leaned forward. "Here's what she didn't tell you. We've been watching Damian Reeves for 18 months. We know about the trafficking operation. We know about Judge Blackwood's involvement. What we didn't know until yesterday was that Valentina has been keeping detailed records of everything." She slid a folder across the table. "These are bank records for accounts we didn't even know existed. Transaction logs that trace money all the way back to the source. Names, dates, locations, everything we need to dismantle not just Damian's operation, but the entire network." I opened the folder and felt my stomach drop. The scope of what I was looking at was staggering. "How long has this been going on?" "At least 5 years, possibly longer. We estimate they've trafficked over 200 people through that operation. 200 lives." The number was incomprehensible. "Agent Cato, if you have all this evidence, why do you need Valentina's cooperation?" "Because having the records isn't the same as being able to use them in court. We need someone who can testify about how the operation worked, who was involved, where the money went. Valentina is the only person who has that knowledge and is willing to cooperate. What about the other people involved? Surely someone else. The other people involved either don't know enough to be useful, or they're too scared to talk. Damian Reeves didn't get to where he is by trusting people. Valentina is the only one who had access to the complete picture." Agent Cato opened another folder. "This is why we need you to file that divorce petition today." The folder contained surveillance photos of Damian Reeves meeting with several men I didn't recognize. These photos were taken yesterday, 6 hours after Valentina met with you. He's accelerating his timeline. My heart started pounding. What does that mean? It means he's planning to move the victims and destroy the evidence. We think he knows Valentina has gone to the authorities. How could he know that? Agent Cato's expression darkened. "Because we think there's a leak in our investigation." The room felt like it was spinning. "A leak?" "Someone with access to our case files has been feeding information to the network. We don't know who yet, but Damian's behavior suggests he knows we're closing in." I set down the photos with shaking hands. "Agent Cato, if there's a leak in your investigation, then Valentina is in immediate danger. We know. That's why we moved her to a safe house last night." "A safe house?" "She told me she was staying at a hotel." She was. Until we intercepted communications indicating that Damian was planning to have her killed. The blood drained from my face. Killed? The original plan was probably to frame her for the trafficking operation, then have her conveniently die before she could defend herself. But now that she's cooperating with us, he's moved straight to elimination. I stood up and paced to the window, trying to process this information. "Agent Cato, I have to ask, is Valentina telling me the truth about her involvement, or is she more complicit than she's letting on?" "That's complicated." I turned back to face her. "What does that mean?" "It means Valentina was definitely more involved than she initially told us. But we also have evidence that Damian used sophisticated psychological manipulation to control her. Gaslighting, isolation, threats, classic techniques used by traffickers to maintain control over their victims." She pulled out another document. "Medical records from 3 years ago show that Valentina was hospitalized for a fall down the stairs. The injuries were consistent with being beaten. When we interviewed the attending physician, he said Valentina seemed terrified and kept asking if her husband had been contacted. So she was a victim. She was a victim who became complicit. It's more common than you might think. Traffickers often use one victim to help control others. It creates a psychological dynamic where the victim feels both responsible for the crimes and unable to escape them." I sat back down, my mind reeling. "Agent Cato, what exactly do you need me to do?" "File that divorce petition today. Make it public record. When Damian's attorneys respond, they'll be forced to disclose financial information that we can use in our investigation. And if Damian retaliates against Valentina, we'll protect her. But we need that divorce filing to happen before he has a chance to hide or destroy more evidence." I looked at my watch. It was already 9 a.m. "I can have the petition filed by noon." "Good. There's one more thing." Of course there was. "What?" "We need you to include a request for a forensic accounting of all marital assets. Make it broad, everything they own, everything they've ever owned, every account they've ever had access to. That's going to raise red flags. That's the point. When Damian's attorneys object to that request, they'll have to explain why they don't want their client's finances examined. That gives us grounds for a broader investigation." I nodded. though part of me felt like I was being used as a pawn in a much larger game. Agent Cato, what happens to Valentina after all this is over? If she cooperates fully and testifies truthfully, we'll recommend immunity from prosecution. She'll probably have to enter witness protection, but she'll be free. And if she doesn't cooperate, then she goes to prison for the rest of her life. The weight of that statement settled over me like a lead blanket. I should get back to my office and finish the petition. One more thing, Agent Cato said as I stood to leave. Be careful who you talk to about this case. We still don't know who the leak is, but they have access to information that could only come from law enforcement or the courts. I drove back to my office with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, I'd made a decision that would either save lives or destroy everything I'd worked for. I was going to file the petition. I was going to trust that Agent Cato and the FBI knew what they were doing. And I was going to pray that Valentina Reeves was telling me the truth about wanting to save those victims. But first, I had a phone call to make. Ted Bauer's office, his secretary answered. This is Rebecca Morrison. I need to speak to Ted immediately about a mutual client. He's in court until this afternoon. Tell him it's about Valentina Reeves and that it's an emergency. 5 minutes later, Ted called me back. Rebecca, what the hell is going on? Valentina called me this morning from some undisclosed location saying the FBI moved her to protective custody. Ted, how much do you know about your client's situation? I know she's married to a man who's been trafficking people and that she wants to cooperate with the feds. What I don't know is why you're involved. I explained about the divorce petition and Agent Cato's request for forensic accounting. Jesus Christ, Rebecca. Do you have any idea what you're walking into? I'm beginning to get a picture. Ted, is Valentina telling the truth about being coerced? Based on the evidence I've seen, yes, but that doesn't mean she's innocent. Coerced participation is still participation. What are her chances if this goes to trial? If she cooperates fully and the FBI gets convictions on the bigger fish, good. If she holds anything back or if the investigation falls apart, she's looking at life in prison. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the decision I was about to make. Ted, I'm filing the petition in 2 hours. Is there anything else I need to know? Yeah, watch your back. Damian Reeves has a lot of money and a lot of connections. If he thinks you're a threat, you could be in danger too. After I hung up, I sat in my office staring at the divorce petition on my computer screen. In 15 years of practice, I'd never been involved in a case where filing a simple legal document could get someone killed. But I thought about that photograph of Esperanza. I thought about the 200 victims Agent Cato had mentioned. I thought about all the future victims who would suffer if this network wasn't shut down. I finished the petition, saved it, and drove to the courthouse. At 11:47 a.m., I filed Valentina Reeves vs. Damian Reeves for divorce, citing physical abuse and requesting immediate separation of assets and forensic accounting of all marital property. By 12:15 p.m., I was back in my office when my secretary buzzed the intercom. Ms. Morrison, there's a man here to see you. He says it's about the Reeves case. My blood turned cold. Did he give his name? He said to tell you he's a friend of Damian's. I looked at my office door, then at my phone, then at the window. For a brief moment, I considered calling Agent Cato. But then I realized that if Damian's people were already here, running would only make things worse. Send him in. The man who walked into my office was not what I expected. He was well-dressed, probably in his 60s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to being in charge. He looked more like a bank president than a criminal enforcer. Ms. Morrison, he said, closing the door behind him. My name is Franklin Whitmore. I'm here to discuss your recent filing on behalf of Valentina Reeves. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm not sure what there is to discuss, Mr. Whitmore. It's a straightforward divorce petition. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Nothing about this situation is straightforward, and we both know it. I'm afraid I don't know what you mean. Ms. Morrison, I'm going to be direct with you because I believe you're an intelligent woman who understands the gravity of her situation. He leaned forward. Valentina Reeves is not the victim she's pretending to be. She's been running the trafficking operation for the past 2 years while her husband focused on expanding the legitimate restaurant business. My heart was pounding, but I kept my expression neutral. That's quite an accusation, Mr. Whitmore. It's not an accusation, it's a fact, and we have extensive documentation to prove it. He pulled a tablet from his briefcase and set it on my desk. Financial records showing that Valentina personally authorized payments to traffickers, video recordings of her negotiating with buyers, testimony from victims who identified her as the person who sold them. I stared at the tablet without touching it. Mr. Whitmore, even if what you're saying is true, it doesn't change the fact that I've been retained to file for divorce. Actually, it changes everything. He tapped the tablet screen. Because what you've filed isn't just a divorce petition. By requesting forensic accounting of Damian's assets, you've given Valentina legal access to records that will allow her to destroy evidence of her own crimes while implicating innocent people. Innocent people like Damian? Whitmore's smile turned cold. Damian Reeves is many things, Ms. Morrison, but he's not a human trafficker. He's a businessman who discovered that his wife was using his restaurants to run a criminal enterprise. When he threatened to expose her, she decided to frame him instead. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. That's not what the FBI believes. The FBI believes what Valentina has told them. She's been feeding them carefully constructed evidence that makes her look like a victim and her husband look like a monster. He leaned back in his chair. The question is, are you going to be complicit in this deception, or are you going to help us expose the truth? I stared at him for a long moment. Mr. Whitmore, who exactly do you represent? I represent justice, Ms. Morrison, and the innocent people who are being framed by a very clever psychopath. And if I don't believe you, then you'll find out the hard way that you're being used. When this investigation concludes, Valentina will disappear into witness protection while you face disbarment proceedings for knowingly assisting in the destruction of evidence. He stood up and headed for the door. Think carefully about whose version of events makes more sense, Ms. Morrison, and ask yourself why a woman who claims to be a victim would have such detailed knowledge of a criminal operation that she supposedly discovered only 6 months ago. After he left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the tablet he'd left behind. Everything I thought I knew about this case was suddenly in question. I picked up my phone and called Agent Cato. "We need to meet," I said when she answered. "What happened?" "Someone claiming to represent Damian Reeves just paid me a visit, and he's telling a very different story about who the real criminal is. By Friday, either Esperanza would be free, or we'd all be joining her in captivity. But first, I had to figure out who was telling the truth, and whether I was helping to save innocent victims or destroy them.